this evening. Hit the button there. And we can get started. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our cover cropping webinar. My name is Emily, and I'm the engagement coordinator with Farm Folk City Folk. And I personally live on the shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. But our work at Farm Folk City Folk takes place on many unceded and sovereign Indigenous territories within the colonial borders of British Columbia. So I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the work that we engage in through our climate solutions program at FFCF, where we promote farming practices considered to be climate friendly, things like reduced tillage and cover cropping, which is the topic for this evening. But I just want to be mindful that these aren't new ideas and that Indigenous peoples have been stewarding and farming land in BC for a really long time. And using a lot of these ecologically mindful practices that we're talking about. And so I just wanted to start us off this evening with honoring the land and the people stewarding this land, both ancestors and those who continue to today. And I invite settlers to continue to learn more about the land that you're on and take action in ways that support Indigenous communities in food sovereignty efforts. So this event is hosted by Farm Folk City Folk, BC's oldest and largest food and agriculture nonprofit, where we work to connect, empower, and inspire people to strengthen BC's food systems. And we do that through a variety of programs, which you can check out on our website, and maybe Coe can pop a link there in the chat if anyone's curious to do that right now. Speaking of, Coe Taylor is with us. She's our communications coordinator. She's here to help out. So if you have any troubles with Zoom or any non-farming related questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and Coe can hopefully help you out. And then we'll just keep all of our farming related questions to our guest speakers, who I am excited to introduce now. So we are joined by Hermann Bruns and Kevin Elmy. Hermann has 24 years of intensive organic vegetable and herb production experience on a 25-acre family farm with 10 seasonal employees, including 26,000 square feet of high tunnels. They do innovative season extension, pest and weed techniques, and experiment with cover cropping. Through the course of the season, they use a few different cover crops, including an underseeded annual ryegrass, a pea, oat, hairy vetch mixture as a main green manure crop, and a fall rye. This year, they are also experimenting with bursum clover. Hermann is the former director of COABC and former president of the Organic Federation of Canada. He and his wife Louise operate Wildflight Farm, established in 1993 along the Shuswap River in Mara, BC. So thanks for being here with us, Hermann, and thanks for giving us a wave. Kevin is a third generation farmer who started researching better ways to farm in 1999. In 2000, he and his family started using soil health principles on their farm, and in 2009, they started using cover crops. By building healthy soil, they have been able to reduce synthetic inputs to the land dramatically while maintaining yields. Kevin runs Cover Crops Canada, helping boost producer profitability and environmental sustainability by strengthening soil properties, by creating friendly microbial soil conditions, by growing diverse crop mixtures. At Cover Crops Canada, he observes the rotational, biological, nutritional, and economic benefits of the use of cover cropping in grain and livestock operations to reduce production and financial risk to producers. So I'm so thrilled to have both Kevin and Hermann here today. I know they're going to bring unique perspectives to the conversation, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from them soon. So we're going to have both presentations first, followed by a Q&A. However, in an effort to make 2 hours behind a computer screen a little more palatable, we can break, in between presentations, maybe for like 5 or 10 minutes, and just ask a few questions that might come up. I think both Kevin and Hermann, you can kind let us know at the start of your presentation. But I think both of our speakers are comfortable with folks asking questions like during the presentation. If you have like a really burning question, if there's something that comes up that you'd really like elaboration on before we move on, just feel free to like use the raise hand option, or feel free to interject maybe at a time that feels most appropriate to do so. But we'll kind of keep the bulk of the Q&A for afterwards. And then lastly, I just want to mention that I think I'm just noticing for myself that I have myself in gallery mode, but I think because both of our speakers are going to be using presentations, it would be great if you could just switch your screen to speaker mode, because then it should be that whoever is talking comes up like big on your screen. So yeah, just maybe try and do that before the presentation starts. If not, you can use the pin screen option. You just click on the little dots on the top right-hand corner of the person that you want to pin, and like a list of options should come up, and you can scroll down and hit pin, and then it'll like pin that one screen to be the main screen that you see. So hopefully that's not too complicated. I'm sorry, I'm just throwing that in now. I just realized when I was looking at my own screen that might be a something to mention. So yeah, I think with that, I'm going to hand it off to Kevin, who's going to start us off.
Okay, share. How does that look?
Looks good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me here today to give a presentation on cover cropping and soil health. Like I said, we're going to fly along through this fairly quick because there's lots of things, lots of bases to cover when we start talking about this. So yes, we did have a farm in eastern Saskatchewan. We end up selling this spring. And so we sold the farm. I moved to Olds, Alberta, and I continue on with Cover Crops Canada. And with that, I do coaching of soil health principles using cover crops. I'm also the cover crop consultant for Imperial Seeds. So there's my contact information, and away we go. So when we start talking about soil health and cover cropping in particular, a lot of people think that they're, either lost or very lost, and, there's no way out of it. And basically, as we get through and learn more about this, we can simplify it down so that this way we can really get a good direction of where we are and where we want to be. So what is soil health? A lot of people are talking about it, but sadly, a lot of people have no idea what it is. So that, yes, I have really healthy soil because I get big yields. And if you listen to Dr. Chris Nichols, one of the things she talks about is number one, what we should get out of agriculture is the word yield. We shouldn't worry about yield. It's net dollars, it's production, it's quality of food. Those are the things that are really important. But soil health is defined as a continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So in our soils, we have different levels of trophic biology. So we have our primary feeders, what are our bacteria and our fungi. Those are the things that really start the whole process of nutrient cycling. And if we don't have the primary predators, the next one that's going to eat the bacteria and the fungi, all of our nutrients are going to get tied up and never released. So we need these primary predators to eat the bacteria and the fungi. So this is the protozoa, amoebas, nematodes, and arthropods. Then above that, we have earthworms, mites, spiders, and beetles. So we need all of these things in a functioning system for our soils to actually perform. And so here's a little diagram of what's actually happening in our soil. So, we have living plants, we have the plant roots, we have the bacteria and the fungi around the roots, feeding the rest of the biology in the system. And it's really important to be able to understand what this big system is. So the soil health, the big deal of this is when the biology is in balance, the system will take care of itself, producing high density nutrient grains or vegetables. And the plants have low stress, less disease, less insects. This is a picture of my daughter out in our winter triticale crop. On our farm, we had 1,500 acres and we were growing, various crops, but the winter triticale I really, really like. And so with this crop, this field had no fertilizer added, no herbicides, no fungicides. That is just how it grew. And this is using, systems that provide the nutrients for those next year's crops. And this whole idea of soil health is not a new idea. Sir Albert Howard, if you go back in the Agricultural Testament, wonderful book to read. And you have to remember that he wrote this in the early 1900s. And so he was really disappointed with the European and British farmers abandoning good agronomy practices in exchange for using synthetic fertilizers. And so, like I said, this isn't new. This is old stuff. And what we're doing is going back to old school agronomy. And one of the quotes I love from Sir Albert Howard is the plant of the soil, the health of the soil, the plant, the animal, man is one and indivisible. And we have to remember that when we have this system and we have, number one, we have an illness in humans, that's going back to, are we eating healthy plants that are coming from healthy soils? And this is that whole part of nutrient dense grain. And that the only way we can produce that is from healthy functioning soils. So when we start looking at our soils, we're going to have a range, and we're going to have very bacterial soils and we'll have very fungal soils. And the way we can tell is when we have bacterial soils, we tend to have soils with poor water infiltration. So they're hydrophobic, so scared of water. We have simple weeds growing like wild oats and cleavers. We have issues with erosion, and we see significant responses to adding fertilizers and fungicides. On the other extreme, when we have a fungi-dominated soil, what's going to happen is we're going to have heavy organic matter soils. We're going to have woody plants growing. We're going to have no disturbance, but we're going to have really stable cycles of nutrients in these soils. And this is where Dr. Elaine Ingham, she suggested that in the soil, we have this thing called the fungal to bacterial ratio. And based on where the fungal to bacterial ratio is at, is going to determine what plants want to grow there. So when we have a very low fungal to bacterial ratio, so that 0.1, this is where we see weeds. This is where we see, in this one, this is from Texas, so they talk about Johnson grass. But in Western Canada, we talk about wild oats and cleavers. When we do a soil test, we'll see high nitrates in our soils. And we also see a lack of oxygen, which creates compaction, which then leads to thistles. As we build the fungal populations in our soils, we start to see higher evolutionary plants growing successionally. And this is where, when we start talking about wanting to grow vegetables, where we want to be is in very dominated soils of lots of fungi. And how do we build fungi? We build fungi by reducing tillage, reducing synthetics, adding a lot of plant diversity, have that living root, all of those keys that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. And as we start getting too fungal, and there's a chance, once again, the whole definition of what is a weed is a plant that's not growing where it's wanted. So when we start getting too fungal dominated for vegetable or grain production, and we start seeing shrubs, vines, bushes, and things like that, native species, that means that's one of the indications that we're becoming more too fungal for growing annual crops or vegetables. When we start seeing trees, then we know we're really, really getting dominated by fungi. And this is where, in agriculture, what we're doing is we're always moving back and forth on this line. And in agriculture, we tend to push that reset button too hard, that moves that fungal to bacterial ratio too low, which creates problems in production. So we need to learn how to feather that reset button so that, you know, we don't get above that 1-to-1 fungal to bacteria ratio in grain and vegetable farming, but make sure we don't hit it too hard so we don't drop below that 0.3. So it's a really interesting dynamics once we look at that scenario. And so Dr. Christine Jones out of Australia, she did some work on crop dependency on mycorrhizal colonization. So mycorrhizae is a good fungi in our soil that works synergistically with our plants to act as extra roots. So when we look at the non-hosts, we're looking at your canola, lupin, mustards, radish, sugar beet, and turnips. The intermediate group, your most mycorrhizal plant is your oats, and your least is your rye triticale wheat. So the more of these cover crops as a cool season grass, if we include oats in it, it does some wonderful things to the soil. Then when we look at the left side where it talks about the dependent species, we're looking at basically all of our legumes, we're looking at our warm season grasses, and we're looking at some species like sunflowers and flax. So these ones on the left where they're dependent on mycorrhizae, we want to have those growing as much as we can in our rotation. And what we want to see is when we're growing these mixtures and blends is we want to see living roots in the soil. So this is a picture from a plot tour we went to where someone had a 45-gallon drum. They filled it full of soil. They grew a cover crop on top. Then during their tour, they got a grinder. They cut it they cut a pie out of the barrel. Then we got a garden hose and we slowly wash the soil away. And you can see in here how those roots are, how intertwined they are. So it's a really neat thing to be able to see under the ground what is happening, because all we see is the above ground plant. We want to dig down, we want to see what's happening below our feet. So when we're building organic matter, when I went to university back in the 90s, you know, we were told that we build organic matter by growing a plant, taking that biomass from the above ground and returning it into the soil. And that's the whole thought of doing zero till. Well, it turns out that the research now shows that up to 80% of the carbon in the above ground plant is lost in the atmosphere in the next 3 years. So where do we build organic matter? Well, this is done through plant photosynthesis of a plant in the vegetative stage. And when a plant is in the vegetative stage, it's going to release up to 80% of the carbon it captures through photosynthesis as a root exudate into the soil. That root exudate is going to feed the soil biology, so your fungi and your bacteria, and that is where we build organic matter. Really neat process of how it works when you look at it at a different angle. So when we want to get into building organic matter, every time we do tillage, we are stimulating bacteria, and when we stimulate bacteria, they're going to be, you know, using any free nitrogen in the soil. That nitrogen, we always balance it. We always have to balance nutrition with carbon. So everything that a carbon-based life form consumes the nutrition has to be tied to carbon molecule. And as soon as we don't have that carbon molecule, so in the soil we have this nitrate production because of different processes in the soil, and we get this nitrate buildup. Now this free nitrates is in the soil. Where's it bound to carbon? Well, the animals and the biology in the soil, when they consume that nitrate, they're going to have to be eating the carbon from organic matter. So that's one of the issues of doing tillage, especially not having any green plants. But keeping that growing plants is very crucial in the system. This is two samples of soil that I took about 10 meters apart. It was an organic field that was in the Regina Plains, so really heavy clays. It was a drier year that year, but you can see the field, the sample on the left, that was from the field where lots of tillage, summer follow. You see the plants growing around it, not very productive. The sample on the right was taken from the fence row. There was some brome grass that was about 1.5 meters high. There was trees growing, And when you dug the soil up, number one, it smelled beautiful. It smelled like earth. Number two, you can see the soil aggregation. And with that soil aggregation, the soil, it had a moist feel to it, where the one on the left, that's as close as dirt as what you can get. So low organic matter, you can see there's no aggregation. The ground was hard. Yeah, it was starving basically for carbon. So I work on, depending on the day, I'll either talk about 5 or 6 keys to soil health. And number one, we need to keep our soils covered. And that is both with whether it's want some stable carbon, so just some plant material, dead plant material, and we also want to have a green plant growing on it. So this is where that soil covered. We want to have that green, we want to have that brown coverage. We want to reduce our tillage. We want to reduce the use of synthetics in that system. We want to increase the diversity of the plants that we're growing. We want to keep a living root in that soil for as many days as we can. And ideally, we want to include livestock. So whether it's, ruminants or, whether it's wild or it's domesticated, it doesn't matter. Getting livestock in there really speeds the process up of creating healthy soils. And in Acres USA, they asked Dr. Jones about, all of this revolves around the concept of a plant microbial bridge. And the really interesting thing she said in there was somewhere between 85 and 90% of the nutrients required for healthy growth are acquired via carbon exchange in the soil. And that's where the plant root exudates provide the energy for microbes in order to maintain minerals and trace elements otherwise unavailable. We inadvertently blow the microbial bridge in conventional farming with high rates of synthetic fertilizers. So it's really neat concept. And this brings us to the use of cover crops. And the cover crop, the quick definition of cover crops is growing plants to protect and improve the soil. They may be harvested, they may not be harvested. So it's really loosey-goosey, but it's definition, but it's something where it's that's basically what we're trying to do is, protect and improve the soil. So in these cover crops, we have lots of uses for them, but they need to be goal oriented. So if you give me a call or drop me an email and you say you want to grow a cover crop, I'm going to ask you questions, and some of those questions are going to be coming up later. But you have to have goals. If you don't have goals of why you're using a cover crop, it's most likely going to fail. The keys we want to do is add diversity to that rotation. We want to keep a living plant growing throughout that whole growing season, and it's going to give us an opportunity to fix our issues that we've identified. So some of these cover crops that we can use, and just different definitions, we can call them a nurse cover crop. So if we're going to grow a forage, we can use it as a nurse. We can use it as a plowed on cover crop, intercropping or a relay cover crop. We can use it as a smother cover crop. We can use it as a nitrogen fixation cover crop, scavenging cover crop, or a hay or grazing cover crop, just to name a few of them. So when we're looking at goals, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want to see changed in your soil? Where do you want to be 5 years from now? Where do you want to be this fall? Where do you want to be next spring? So it can be more than one thing, and it can change. Once again, it's just a goal. So if you're setting goals for yourself, that's easy to move around. So do you have a hard pan breakup? Do you have slow water infiltration? Are you trying to produce animal feed? Are you fixing nitrogen? Are you cycling nutrients, smothering weeds? What are you trying to do? And so this is the number one thing when we're talking is once we identify what we're trying to do and where do we want to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, then we can start making some smart, educated management decisions. So when we start talking about blends, to add this diversity, I work on having 5 functional plant groups. So our grasses, our legumes, and within our broadleaves, we have our brassicas, our non-brassicas, and forbs. Those are the ones that we want to try and include in our system to make it healthy. And when we start talking about grasses, the key to grasses, if you're looking for tons, this is what grasses do. They produce tons, lots of biomass, a large fibrous root system, and good mycorrhizal support. With your legumes, it's moderate tonnage, relatively weak root system, but very highly dependent on mycorrhizae, minus the plant in the picture, which is lupin. And they will fix nitrogen if properly inoculated. Now, your broadleases are very diverse groups. So your brassicas and non-brassicas, they tend to scavenge nutrients. The brassicas tend to have no mycorrhizae association, but a really good source of vitamin E for grazing. In your non-brassicas, they will have decent mycorrhizae association. Now, the forbs are one area that we in agriculture systems tend to be missing. Very specialized plants, it adds lots of diversity. And one of the ones that I absolutely love in annual systems is in the picture called Phacelia. It is absolute crack cocaine for bees. They go crazy over it, and it produces some of the highest quality honey that any plants will produce. The nice thing from our perspective is it produces lots of root exudates, and it creates some of the fastest soil structure you can. So if you have these soils with very poor soil structure, you seed this Phacelia at fairly high rates, and it'll create a lot of quick soil structure for you. So these blends, once again, we're looking for diversity. So having these functional plant groups of grasses, legumes, broadleaves, forbs, when we're looking at that, we're looking at warm season, cool season species of each. We're looking at annuals, biennials, and perennials. So once again, now we were just adding more functional plant groups within those groups. So lots of diversity. We want to match the species to our goals. And we do not want to allow a pest bridge, meaning that, out in Western Canada, it's the cool thing for the conventional farmer to grow wheat and canola, and that's their crop oscillation. So if they want to seed radishes in there, well, if they seed it after the wheat, what's going to happen is they'll seed the radish after wheat, the radishes will grow, the flea beetles will be there, and they have a really nice habitat to overwinter. So when they seed canola, the flea beetles are already there and they're going to eat the canola. If they, after the canola, decide to grow the radishes, they're going to see the radishes, the flea beetles are already there looking for something to eat, so they're going to eat all the radishes. So it doesn't work. So here is the kind of the visual that I use. So there's our grasses, their legumes, brassica, non-brassica, and forbs. And remember, warm season, cool season, annual, biennial, perennial. This is where we get the diversity from. So one of the questions that I saw in the screening when everybody registered was about controlling weeds. And so one of the things that we talk about is the carbon nitrogen ratio. And so this is going to control how fast that residue rots. So something with a very tight C/N ratio, so that means the carbon nitrogen are going to be fairly close. It's going to rot down quick. So this green plant growing in this straw, that's radishes. So when it rots, it's going to be a very tight C/N ratio. So it's going to feed bacteria, going to give a fast rot and release the nutrients very quickly. On the flip side, that straw is a wide C/N ratio, so there's lots of carbon and very little nitrogen. And so you're going to need more fungi to break those down. So it's going to give a slow rot, and it's going to give it a nutrient tie-up. So when you look at some of the species, you're going to see some of the average carbon nitrogen ratio. So you'll see with mature rye straw or wheat straw, you're looking at about 80:1 carbon to nitrogen. Ideally, in the soil, you're going to be looking at about 24:1. That's what they call an ideal microbial diet, which will maintain the amount of residue on that soil surface. Whereas if you have those young radish plants growing and rotting, that's going to be about a 10:1. So that's going to be way too much nitrogen in that residue. So the microbes are actually going to be looking for more carbon to eat to balance off their diet. On that wheat straw at 80:1, in order to get down to 24:1, they're going to be looking for 3 units of nitrogen to get that residue down where they can eat it and break it down. That's the reason why it takes so long to break down some of that residue. There's a company in Europe or in England that's called 12 Seeds, and they have some really nice graphics that they have on their website, and this is one of them. So, these are some of the species that we can grow. We use a lot of these in Western Canada, but you get to see what kind of rooting system it has, what type of top growth. If you're not familiar with some of the names, so the lucerne is is alfalfa, cocksfoot is orchard grass, and ribgrass is plantain. So you get to see what these rooting systems are, and we want to add a lot of these this diversity to this mix, both above ground and below ground. Okay. So our rotation. So a proper rotation helps drive healthy plants, healthy soils, because now we're starting to deal with some balanced plant nutrition. We get higher Brix levels. More crop diversity basically drives more microbe diversity. More microbe diversity gives us more resilience. It's a beautiful system. When we start talking about intercropping, oh, hit the wrong button. When we start talking about intercropping, that's growing 2 or more cash crops together. When we talk about relay cover cropping, that's when we're growing our cover crop or our cash crop and having something growing underneath it, so that when we harvest our cash crop, now we have that cover crop growing underneath it. It gets sunlight, it takes off, and it starts to flourish. And so this is where, in Western Canada, we have problems with in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba. We run out of time in the fall, either moisture or time. So if we have it established in the spring, growing underneath and not competing with our cash crop, then when we harvest our cash crop, it continues growing in the fall. It's a win. And so, growing as an intercrop, growing flax and oats, this has been done and research been shown back in the 1930s. Peas and mustard, or peas and canola, nice mix to grow with, and it really reduces the cash inputs. When you look at a relay cover crop, in your cereal, throwing in subterranean clover, or in this case, this is some Italian ryegrass, another crop that I eat, or plant I use a lot of in cover crops. Using barley and sweet clover, great relay cover crop. So you take the barley off, and the sweet clover keeps on growing. So cover cropping is a tool. It's going to allow you to meet your goals, cycle nutrients, control pests, but it's only one tool to build soil health. If you don't do, reduce tillage, if you're conventional, if you're not reducing synthetics or, the fungicides, if you don't have that living root, if you don't have living cover on that soil, and including livestock, it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle for you. So to get as many of those incorporated into your management system, it's going to work the best. So once again, here's a spring triticale crop that I grew with no inputs. Nice and clean, big heads on it. There's no disease. It's a functioning system. So if you go to covercrops.ca is the website for Cover Crops Canada, I have this, the cover crop assessment sheet. So that this way you get to go in and put what conditions you have. And then in here, for end use, what do you want to do with it? What are your issues? When are you going to seed it? How are you going to seed it? And termination date. What was your last crop? What is your next crop? What weeds do you see? And then there's another line in there I just added was what seeds are you going to supply? So that this way we can go through and create a system for you. And, it doesn't have to be high tech. It doesn't have to be fancy. This is a picture from my buddy Steve Groff in Pennsylvania. The Amish, this one is cheating. He does have a little Honda motor up there that is spinning his spreader. But, how simple is that?
Good. People enjoying it?
So here's some of the examples. This is from the Lloydminster, Saskatchewan area. The producer grew corn, and after he finished spraying it, conventional grower, he went out and he spread some collards, radish, Italian ryegrass into it. And during the growing season, there wasn't much out there. So the end of July, we didn't see much. And in the fall, when the leaves started on the corn, when they started coming down, all of a sudden this cover crop just sprung to life. And his issue was he didn't graze it fast enough, and the deer and the elk moved in and it cleaned up in between the rows on him. So, but it does show that it will grow. Growing a blend like this has to be spread late in the season. If you seed it early, these are going to interfere with the nutrient uptake of your corn. Now, this is what I did on our farm, is I seeded a cover crop of annual clovers. I turned around and I seeded our sweet corn on 30-inch rows and a 60-inch space. So there's two 30-inch rows, one 60-inch space, and then back to 30-inch rows. And that was more for picking. But there was, that system supplied all the nutrients for that corn plant. And it did not interfere with it. There was no competition. There's no antagonism. There were synergies because a grass plant and a legume plant have evolved to grow together. You throw another grass in there, you got problems. You throw a brassica in there, you got problems. Grasses and legumes are designed to grow together, and we can get deeper into that if anybody's interested later. So here's another cover crop that I used, a full season cover crop. There's our legumes, there's some Phacelia, there's some millet, and underneath it is some perennial ryegrass. That's what it looked like in the fall. That's when the first snow we had, and yet when he kicked it back, everything seemed dead, but underneath the perennial ryegrass was there and very happy growing. Well, not happily growing, but it was still live. Next year we grew a perennial ryegrass crop. Here's some subterranean clover. Once again, growing under the canopy, kind of doing its thing. One of the really good books I recommend is Dr. David R. Montgomery, Dirt, the Erosion of Civilization. He goes through each of the major civilizations through history and talks about why they failed. And every time, the key points that in each one of these civilizations was absentee landowners, large farms, loss of livestock on the land, reliance on capital assets, reliance on high nutrient crops requiring like for export, and the loss of soil health. And this is what scares me, is we're setting ourselves up for exactly the same situation today. So when we start talking about changing, from conventional agriculture and doing regenerative ag, back in the day, why do we need to go to electricity and light bulbs? Because candles work, right? Well, life's a little better now. Soil health is a lifelong endeavor and not an overnight fix. So you have to be patient when you're starting getting into this, because soil health is difficult to build, hard to maintain, and really easy to destroy. Your answers, when you're out there, you're going to hear lots of simple but wrong answers. A lot of these answers are complex, but they're right, and they're going to take a little bit of work. And it doesn't matter how many mistakes you made, how slow your process, you're still ahead of everyone who isn't trying. So don't give up, ask questions. Groups like this is awesome. This is one of the books I highly recommend to get to be able to help control weeds, because weeds grow because soils are telling us what's happening or not happening in the soil. So this book will go through and give you the soil conditions of why these weeds grow. Now we have to figure out what plants can we seed there to fix that problem. And for my shameless plug, if anybody is interested, I wrote a book called Cover Cropping in Western Canada. It is available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, digital, Friesen Press. You can get the digital versions, or if you contact me, I usually do a meeting special where $45 includes mailing. We'll mail you out a book of a paperback. So that's my shameless plug. You have to remember that only dead fish go with the flow. So going out and doing things different, that means that that you're thinking. So there's my contact information. And if you have any questions, I'll click the chat and see if there's anything.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I did see some questions come through. So yeah, maybe we could answer just like a few of them before we move on to Hermann. We can just kind of have a little break to answer a couple of questions. I've been keeping track of them. So if you want me, do you want me to just relay them to you? Would that be easier than you trying to scroll through?
Yeah, fire them away. That's gonna be quickest.
Okay, sure. So the first question is, Do you find that there are any cover crops for spring and fall coverage that have competed too much with your cash crops?
Absolutely. Depending, once again, going back to that triangle, knowing where you are, what you're growing, what you're trying to grow, stay away from that part of the triangle. So if you are growing oats, stay away from any other grasses. Stay away from your brassicas. Your brassicas are scavengers, so they will compete. When we deal with the legumes, once again, if you want to go into the long version, I can get into it, but basically the legumes need a lot of phosphate in order to fix nitrogen. Grasses were able to source a lot of phosphate, but need nitrogen. So the mycorrhizae link those two plants together and are able to share nutrients. So if we work on synergies and stay away from antagonisms, the other one that I really don't like for small seeded species that we're trying to grow is fall rye because of allelopathy. And so I tend to stay away from a lot of fall rye in my system unless you're dealing with large seeded species or lots of rain. So those are the ones that I kind of avoid.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers your question. Another question that we had come in is just someone wondering, what do you do with the cover crop at the end of the season?
So, one of the things that in the past, what we've done is we've used it, and once again, working on Sir Howard's work, is use it as a mulch. So that this way we have that mulch laying on the surface to create the soil armor. And when we have a biennial in the system, it's going to grow through that mulch. And, the whole thing with compost and compost teas is, trying to put good biology on the leaves. Well, having that mulch on the surface and having the plants grow through it does exactly the same thing as mulching or as composting. So, we can leave some of the mulch, economically, there's not a huge return on it. But when we start looking at the next step of livestock integration, if we can go in and graze and Jay Fear, one of my mentors, one of the things he says is when you're grazing, always leave half of the plants out in the field, half of the growth. Number one, most of your higher quality feed is in the top half. Number two, all your issues are in the bottom. So your nitrates, your high lignin. So doing the animal grazing is an awesome way to cycle nutrients. And if for me, I don't own animals, I don't want to own animals, it gave me some income. And so, the livestock producers are more than happy to bring animals over to do grazing. So most of the time, yeah, I manage that carbon to nitrogen ratio so that this way it's going to rot down that next spring, so it's not going to create issues. Or, if you're not set up for it yet, a little bit of tillage in the spring, not a bad thing. Keyword is a little bit. So it's managing those all those variables. And once again, what's your goal? What are your tools? What are you trying to do?
Yeah, great, thanks. And then someone just wanted to have you repeat what you grew with your sweet corn. Thank you.
Well, the sweet corn, I used a combination of subterranean clover, Persian clover, crimson clover, and Berseem clover, and a little bit of Phacelia.
Okay, great. And then I see there's a bunch more questions coming in. I think just because I'm just keeping track of the time here, I think we'll just switch over and have maybe Hermann present, and then I'll go back and make sure we get to all these questions during the Q&A, and then also maybe Hermann might even answer some of these questions in his presentation. So Kevin, feel free to stop your screen share, and then that way Hermann can go ahead and start his.
Okay, hey everyone. I'll just start off with a quick overview of what our farm is. Very different from Kevin's, of course, being in a very different part of the world and growing vegetables. So we're located in the North Okanagan along the Shuswap River on Secwepemc territory. We've been farming here for 28 years. and grow a wide range of market vegetables, from everything from asparagus to zucchini, so A to Z kind of thing, which we market at local farmers markets for the most part. I think, well, I'll just show you a quick, let's see here, I'll just share the screen. I'll show you a little quick overview video. Where's that one? There we are. So this is just kind of a little drone video that shows you basically the farm, and pictures are worth 1,000 words, so this should give you a bit of a quick overview of the farm. So just sort of cruising across some of the crops, you can see there's some corn and cabbage and brassicas, and the next couple generations of corn, more brassicas, beets for the fall. So it's sort of midsummer, like August. I'll just pause it there for a second, because if you look over here, can you see my cursor when I show it on there or not?
Yep, we can.
Yeah, so on the corner here, this is our asparagus. So we'll come back to that later. I'll show you some photos of that. Yeah, just doing a quick round here, showing more. Actually, if I just back it up for a second there, we've got that dark green crop here is celeriac, and next to it are leeks. So this is leek and celeriac, and so those will show. I'll show you some pictures of those later as well, closer up, and what we do there. And then the other main thing that I wanted to show you is this whole area here. This is a big area that we take about half of our farm out of production every year and grow a green manure on there. And it's a mixture of peas, oats, and hairy vetch. And I'll show you some pictures of that later as well. But I just thought I'd show you on the video here how it, it takes up a big chunk of the land. You'll get a bit more of a view of it. That's the Shuswap River over here that's flowing past. And then you'll see we've got some greenhouses and our packing shed over here as well. But here you get a good view of this is a really nice, for me, I just love looking at stuff like this. I love seeing all this biomass and green and all the nitrogen that's being fixated, and it's pretty cool. I just know that that's going to be a great place to grow vegetables the next year. So anyway, I think that gives you a bit of an overview of the farm, and I'll just go from there and into my here. There we are, cover crop. So there's basically three things that we use on our farm. I've tried various different things, and I found that these are the three that I've kind of settled on. I'm always experimenting with some other ones as well, just to see if I can find something that works a little bit better or whatever. But anyway, here's one that probably everyone will recognize, is fall rye. And it's kind of an old standby that lots of people use to take their soils from the fall, any empty soils or any kind of bare soil, and kind of carry it in through the winter, and then it'll start growing really early in the spring. And so in the meantime, it's holding on to nutrients that are available in the soil, I find. And that's one of the reasons. And it also covers the soil and prevents weeds from growing. Like, this is just very young stuff here, but give it another 3-4 weeks and it'll be just a solid mat of green, and nothing else can kind of really get through there. So that's one thing that I'm always looking for in a green manure, is a way to keep the weeds at bay. The bane of every organic vegetable farmer's existence. Anyway, so carrying on. So this is what fall rye looks like. The seed, I think most people are familiar with it. Here's close up of the plants growing. Just love the way they grow, and the work they do to protect the soil. It's really cool. This is just a field. This was seeded maybe in late August, early September, and it's probably like 2-3 weeks after seeding, and give it another like 3-4 weeks, and it'll be like a solid mat of green. You won't see any soil. And then that's capturing all those nutrients that are available in the soil, holding on to them throughout the winter with their extensive root system. And then in the spring, they just take off and start creating all kinds of nice green material that then you can till in. And that's essentially what we do. So this is in the spring. This is what our fall rye looks like. It's really just a carpet of green. and you're tilling in all this organic matter into the soil. So really lovely to be able to do that. And you know that you're feeding all kinds of soil organisms with this. Just another shot of the same thing. Basically, it was a bit wet that spring by the looks of it. So don't really like it when the soil is sticking to the tire, but it probably had just been raining or early in the morning, and yeah. So that was back there was just sort of the conventional way of using fall rye. But there are other ways too to do it, and that's as underseeding some of your crops. So here's an example of where I've used fall rye. I've underseeded my leeks. So I planted my leeks, cultivated them and tilled them, kept them weed free until into August, and then I went in and just threw in a bunch of fall rye to grow in between the rows and keep the weeds at bay and kind of keep it nice and green in between the rows. So this is sort of a less usual way of using fall rye that I thought I'd just show you. Here's an example of what our leeks looked like before we started using the fall rye in there. You can see lots of different weeds coming up, even though I did till them and cultivate them. But then weeds eventually just grow. If there's an open space, they're going to want to grow. And so what I'm doing with the fall rye is taking away that open space with something that I can control, and I can predict how it's going to grow, and it's not going to set seed on me and create all kinds of issues next year, right? So I think that's one of the things one of the other reasons to use to underseed. That's one of the sort of my prime reasons is that he said it for weed control, and also it's nice to. Here's what it looks like instead of the weeds. So you can see this really nice green carpet between my leek plants, and it's nice to be able to go in and harvest them because our soil is sort of a clay, silty clay loam, and when it gets wet in the fall, it sticks to your boots like crazy, and it's not much fun to harvest in there. But when you're working on this green carpet, basically, it's a lot nicer. And at the same time, you know that it's protecting the soil in between the leeks. So I really like looking at something like the example of us harvesting. It doesn't seem to make it any more difficult to harvest. We just loosen the leeks and pull them out. Either we loosen them with a shovel, or we use an undercutter on a tractor, and we can loosen them up and we just pull them out. And sometimes the actual here's an example of just a shot of our leek field today. And yeah, we've been harvesting leeks, but there's lots of fall rye in around here that's still alive, even though we did use an undercutter in parts of it. And it'll just come back, and in the spring it'll be full on fall rye. So that's always kind of nice when you can kind of keep the soil covered and at the same time, feed it in the spring. Yeah, so I'll just quickly throw up a question here, is if there's anyone that has any questions on what I've shown you so far about how we use fall rye. Great, I'll just move on.
I have a question.
Here's another example of where we use fall rye. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I go ahead? How do you spread the fall rye when you're underseeding like that? Just by dispersion?
Oh yeah, I use it. Yeah, I just use a hand crank broadcast seeder. I'll show you a picture of it later on. Yeah, it's
And
really
then
simple.
okay. Another question is, do you I guess it depends on the type of soil and stuff, but when you're using these cover crops, do you find, or I guess my concern is that the fall rye would take some of the nutrient from your crop.
Yeah, well, you can see from the leeks they were looking pretty healthy. I mean, I think it's a matter of timing. You don't want to put them in too early, of course. But once the crop's at a certain level, it's got control, and it depends a little bit on your soils. You really have to experiment with these things. Try some things out, and just that's been my experience anyway. I just try something and think, okay, well, did that work or did it not? You can see here on the celeriac, for example, it kind of looks a little scary because the celeriac is sort of, yeah, the fall rye grew really well this year for some reason, and it got way sort of bigger than normal. But let's take a quick look here. Here's my celeriac. These are nice size roots. They're getting into the 3-pound size, so they're really nice and big. So I had no problems with the root sizing. If anything, my problem is that they're kind of already getting a little on the big side. Just another photo of the same thing. Yeah, so yeah, when you look at it like this, you think, ooh, and that could be hard to harvest. But let's see here. I think I put a little video in here. I'm not sure if it's going to play. Yeah, there it goes. So that's how we're harvesting them, with an undercutter. And yeah, we're getting a little bit of bunching up of some things there, but for the most part, they're going through really well. So that was pretty cool to, yeah, I was a bit worried that maybe I'd gotten a little too much fall rye in there, and it'll be amazing. We'll kill a lot of the fall rye, but it comes back so easy. It's hard to kill at this time of year when the soil is so wet. Fall rye has this ability to just kind of recover from just about anything. So to the point where it can be sometimes hard to kill in the spring if you're trying to get into the soil early. You got to make sure you set aside some areas that don't have fall rye in them. Anyway, so that's sort of the fall rye thing. Here's just a little transition shot. So on the left, we see fall rye that was just broadcast seeded in one of our sort of later areas. And to the right is another green rye, but this one's called annual ryegrass. It's another one of my favorites that we use quite a lot. And in this case, I'd underseeded it in our corn, our sweet corn. But anyway, we'll get to that in a short minute here. One of the places that I like to use annual ryegrass is in asparagus, because one of the things that I like about annual ryegrass is that it germinates really quickly. You just broadcast it on the surface, give it a good watering, or if there's a rain, that's even better, and it germinates within a few days. And usually we'll beat most of the weeds off the mark. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for weed control in this particular case. And the side benefit is it does a lot of good for the soil and keeps them covered. But I want to keep the weeds at bay as much as I can. So I after we finish picking our asparagus, like we are here, then I'll go through with this tractor, this little cultivating tractor here. It's got these hillers on it, these coulters that throw the soil into the middle of the row and create a hill. And bury any sort of weeds that have germinated while we were picking. And you can see in action here where the soil is just flowing into the middle of the row and burying any sort of fresh weeds that are coming up. And then at the end, that's what it looks like here. It's pretty much weed free. This row hasn't been hilled yet, so it has a few weeds here and there that are just coming up. This is actual annual ryegrass, so I don't really care about that. That can stay there if it wants, but really you want a nice clean surface, and then I'll go in and broadcast seed the annual ryegrass in this case. And the nice thing about annual ryegrass in this case, another reason why I want annual ryegrass is because I don't want it to be there next season when I'm starting to wanting to pick asparagus, because if it was fall rye, it would just take over and totally wipe out my asparagus. But with annual ryegrass, it winter kills. So in the winter, I've got a nice mulch, and basically my field starts off without having to try and kill a bunch of grass. Anyway, here's a photo of annual ryegrass, just for those of you who haven't seen it yet. It kind of looks like a lot of grasses, and yeah, I run it through the same broadcast seeder. Here's an example. I actually realized I didn't even have a photo of myself doing it, so I had to find this one on the internet, just to show you how it works. And yeah, you just put the seed in the top and you walk along and turn the crank handle, and then you just watch where the seed goes, and make sure that you do it in a way that you get a nice even coverage. Anyway, so this is what the asparagus looks like after, let's say about 3-4 weeks after we've cultivated it and underseeded it with the annual ryegrass. And in this particular year, it worked really, really well. And you can see it's just a mat of grass underneath there, and very few weeds. I don't really see any weeds in this particular section. And once annual ryegrass is established, that's the cool thing about it. If you seed it thick enough, there's no weed that's going to get past it, really. I mean, once it's going, it's there and it's taking over. But of course, the asparagus is way above it, so it doesn't care what's going on underneath. And so I find that works really well for weed control. There are some times when it doesn't work. If you can't get it established well, like this summer it was not so good, because it was so damn hot and dry, and I couldn't get it to germinate really well, even though I was blasting it with water. It just was still not quite good enough. So here's a same shot of the same asparagus in the fall, just to kind of give you an idea of how it did for weed control. There aren't any weeds there, just aren't any, which is really great. Which asparagus is tough to keep. Moving on to another vegetable that we use. So we do a fair number of crops where I like to underseed annual ryegrass. It just seems to work really well. And this is sweet corn, so it's interesting, similar to what Kevin was saying. And I've tried using various legumes as well, and just never quite was happy with the way they grew underneath, and they just didn't quite seem to get established as well, and then didn't compete with weeds as well as the and I found, yeah, I'm kind of breaking a bit of a rule by seeding a grass underneath a grass, but I tried it anyway. And in our soils have enough fertility in them that and if I got the timing right, it worked. And so here's what I don't know how that photo got in there. I'll just skip that. So here's what we do. When our corn is about just above the knee, let's say halfway up the thigh, I'll go through and do one last cultivation, and with a cultivating tractor. This is the tractor right here, and it's same one as we had before with the coulters on it. This one doesn't have coulters, but it'll also hill soil towards the middle of the row, burying any weeds. So I've got a completely clean field, and then after that, so that's what it looks like. It's completely clean. There's nothing there, and that's where, when the soil is fresh, I'll throw in the annual ryegrass, and then hopefully either wait for rain or irrigate right after that, and then that's what it looks like later on, and that's looking really nice. It's great when you're picking corn. You're not slip sliding around on a mucky clay soil. And then the nice thing is, after the corn has been picked, that's when I can just go through with a mower, mow off the corn, and yeah, I've got this beautiful green carpet that comes up right up underneath. And I didn't have to do any more tillage or anything to get anything established. It's already all there. And then eventually it ends up like showing, like that first shot that I showed you that had half fall rye and half annual ryegrass. That's what it looks like. Here's another example, another shot of it. You can see the old corn stalks here, and lots of annual ryegrass coming up around it and creating a nice cover. They're so rooty and weedy, like so many roots that they kind of just lock up the soil, and the weeds just can't get past them, which is really, that's what I'm looking for. Tie up those nutrients and hold on to them, and don't let the weeds get going. So it's just lovely to see that much, like a big swath of green like that. We also do it with under our brassicas. Particularly, this is our winter cabbage. So at a certain stage after our last cultivation, I'll go through it and throw seed on with the hand crank seeder, and the seed germinates and fills all the little empty spaces that the cabbage isn't filling, and protects the soil, and yeah, just looks nice. I like it, the way it looks too. Another shot of a red cabbage, similar sort of situation. Yeah, and it's not competing against the cabbage. Like we get lots of great cabbage, and yeah, it's remarkable. I think the cabbage is just so well established by the time it gets the grass, and the grass really only grows vigorously between the rows, and not so much like right where the cabbage has its roots. So this is what it looks like after I mow. So on the left actually is that same field where I had corn, and you can see how that was how beautifully the grass came back, the annual ryegrass, after I mowed the corn. The cabbage I mowed quite a bit later, of course, because we didn't harvest this until early October. So it's not quite coming back quite as quickly, but it is there, and it will come. Give it a little bit more time. It's not quite as good though. But if you look closely at the bottom, like here's quite a bit of grass. And even in places like this where it looks like there's not much grass, if you look in the next photo here, you can see grass coming up all over the place here. It just needs a little bit of time to get going because it's been shaded out so long by the cabbage. Anyway, so it's always kind of exciting to see the grass coming along. Another place we use annual ryegrass is between our raspberry rows too. So usually each year we would go in and just till early in the spring to get any weeds and some canes that kind of move out into the row. We kill them off, and then we throw in our annual ryegrass, and it creates like a lawn underneath there, and it's nice to pick on, and it's adding soil, organic matter to the soil, and protecting the soil. Kale is another one. This is about the stage that I would normally we would do our last cultivation and be throwing in our annual ryegrass. Sometimes I can do fall rye in here as well. Works too. Flowers, we grow some flowers sometimes just for the heck of it, and because it looks nice. And we do have we have sort of a U-pick thing there. People can come and pick up some flowers. So you can see in between the rows, I've got annual ryegrass seeded there. So it's kind of keeping the weeds from growing, and also creating a nice surface to walk on if you're going through there and picking some flowers. So that was the ryegrass. Actually, I'll just take a quick pause here. If there's anyone that has a question about our annual ryegrass, I'm going to move on to something else now. So if there's anything that just quickly that I didn't explain well enough, I'm happy to answer it before I move on. Okay.
Do you have a solution for someone that has a lot of couch grass or quack grass in a very heavy soil? Would any of these cover crop, would this do something to help keep that down or not?
Yeah, I think so, totally. One of the things that couch grass or quack grass doesn't like is competition. And if you can get you can get some really strong aggressive green manures in there a few years in a row and till it in between, the quack grass will just disappear. We have absolutely no quack grass issues, and there was quack grass around, and it's definitely there. Like you can find it in along the in places where we don't till and where we don't use a lot of that are along the edges of the field and that. So it's still there, but it has nothing to say. It can't compete against really solid green manures. So yeah, it definitely makes a difference. Yeah, but as soon as you leave something open, like quackgrass would really easily and would love to get established in asparagus, because asparagus is a perennial crop, right? So you can't get in there and completely till it every year to kill anything. So those perennial weeds like to get established in there, and the better you can get something else like that you can control, like annual ryegrass in there, it just doesn't give the you're not leaving much space for the quackgrass to get going. It just can't go anywhere because the annual ryegrass takes over. Yeah, it's really effective. Okay, yeah, so actually before I go to that, yeah, I just wanted to this is again an aerial shot of that same one as we saw in the intro video, of this really nice green manure mix. So this is, we take about, like I said, about half of our farm out of production every season and grow a dedicated green manure. In this case, it's peas, oats, and hairy vetch mix. And I really like it for a number of reasons. And one of the main ones is that it does grow quite a lot of biomass. I like to see lots of greens, and hairy vetch is one of the best nitrogen fixers around. So that's another good thing. And the other thing that I like about hairy vetch is that it also likes to just take over. And it'll once it's established, absolutely nothing gets past it. It'll just grow over everything and just knock it down. It's amazing stuff. So I will show you some more pictures of that just because we got some. Anyway, this is what hairy vetch seed looks like. It looks like pepper kind of thing to me, peppercorns, but it's expensive. It's about probably more expensive than pepper even, but yeah, it's expensive stuff, but it's worth it. I find I know that I always have to sort of grit my teeth when I pay the seed bill for that, but it is, when I see it grow, I think, oh yeah, that stuff's good. So here it is. This is when it's growing in the field, and you can see it basically. I mean, this was a field of peas, oats, and hairy vetch, but there's not much of the peas and oats to be seen anymore because the hairy vetch came up in between and kind of took over. And it just keeps on growing. It just never stops, just keeps going. And you get a huge amount of growth out of it, and presumably nitrogen fixation too. So this is just another shot of the same thing. But it doesn't always work. Like I said, this year, for example, we had some problems with getting it established as well as I'd like to have gotten it. It just didn't get a really good start because of the fact that it was so hot and dry. And so we got a few areas where there were some weeds, quite a few weeds. This is mostly red root pigweed here, and I really didn't want to see that stuff go to seed. So just before it was starting to go to seed, I had to go in and take down my green manure quite a bit earlier than I would normally have done. I would have probably left it and let it winter kill. But yeah, I had to do it because there was no way I was going to let that many weeds go to seed. But you can see, judging by the tractor, I mean, it's basically, almost at chest height for me. So that's a lot of stuff to be tilling in it. It was already still pretty good, even though I had to till it in a lot earlier than I really wanted to. This is just a side shot of how I do it. And what I do and this sort of brings up the question of, okay, how do you deal with green manures once you've got them established? Because, by definition, they're kind of big and hard to deal with, and you want them to be really aggressive, but then at some point you have to say, okay, well, enough is enough, and I got to get in there with some crops. So what I do is I use a rotavator, and I do a fairly fast pass, and I do a shallow and fast. So what I'm trying to do is just sort of chop up the crop and incorporate it into a shallow layer of soil. So I'm not going very deep with the rotavator, and I'm not taking a lot of time. I'm just sort of trying to chop it up and incorporate it a little bit into the soil, so that then I can give it 2 or 3 weeks to kind of break down in the soil. The soil organisms will do their thing and start breaking it down, and then later I'll come in with either a chisel plow or a heavier cultivator, and kind of go a little bit deeper than the rotavator would have done, and loosen up the soil if there was any kind of plow pan that was created by the rotavator or something like that, and then I can get it ready for seeding again. So that's sort of my general. I do that with the fall rye that you saw earlier. I forgot to mention that that's what we were doing there with the rotavator, is taking down the fall rye. We'll give it 2 or 3 weeks to kind of break down, and then we'll start tilling the soil and getting it ready for vegetable production.
Hey, Herman, sorry to interject just for a quick moment. I'm just noticing there are like a bunch of questions in the chat. I know like people are sort of asking questions as we go, but instead of, I don't want you to have to keep an eye on the chat and also be on your screen.
I don't even see this chat actually when I'm in presentation mode.
Oh yeah, that's okay. I think, yeah, presentation mode kind of messes with your screen. So that's totally fine. I was just gonna mention maybe, I'm not sure how much more you still have to cover, but maybe we could like try and wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so, and then we could just go straight into questions and I can kind of go through and just ask them.
Almost done here, just
Yeah.
coming to the end. Great, okay. Yeah, sorry I didn't see those questions, and hopefully we can answer them towards the end. Yeah, so I was telling you that it doesn't always work in the asparagus, and here's an example. This is this year's asparagus, and you can see if you look closely, I'm not sure if I can, yeah, I can zoom it in a little closer. There's grass there, there's annual ryegrass there, but there's also quite a few weeds in there, and it just didn't quite work because the grass just didn't get established as quickly and as well as it would have in a normal year, and some of the broadleaves just had an advantage. And so we have a lot more weeds in our asparagus, probably still less than if we'd done nothing, but still more than I'd like to see. So, you know, these things, you know, you're working with nature, it's not always going to work out perfectly. But this is basically what I like to see when I look out in the fall from my house out onto the fields. I just like to see this massive swath of green wherever, you know, we aren't harvesting crops, like completely nicely put to bed and covered for the winter. So yeah, that's it. If we want to go to some of the questions, we could do that.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you both. Like that was, you know, a lot of information there, and I know that there are already a ton of questions. I'm sure more are going to keep coming in. So thank you for that. I'm just gonna kind of go back up to the top where we left off, because I know we sort of cut the questions off right before Herman started presenting, and then so I just want to make sure we get to some of the ones that were asked earlier. So this was a question from Arzina. As a certified organic vegetable grower, I would love to have zero tillage, but I don't understand how to bed prep with zero till and cover crops. So I think this question, like, you know, Herman or Kevin, feel free to both answer this with your thoughts.
Well, I'll jump in since it's a vegetable situation. I can certainly empathize with you, Arzina, because yeah, it's really not very feasible. I don't think, not the kind of farming we do. If you knew that you were going to be planting, you know, a couple acres of brassicas on a specific day, you could conceivably grow a green manure and then use one of the roller crimper methods, and then you'd have to have a fancy transplanter to be able to transplant into sort of the cover crop residue. But with the kind of market gardening, we're planting 2-3 times a week. We're constantly planting. So there's no way that you can line all that up, and it just isn't going to work. So I kind of have resigned myself to realizing that, yeah, vegetable production is really hard on soil. And that's why I like to kind of give it a break in between by giving it the green manure year in between. And I can afford to do that because I happen to have more land than I need for vegetable production. But other ways of doing it is just to, you know, you can, if you're on a more intensive scale, as like I suspect you probably are, is, you know, you'll want to just use, you know, lots of organic fertilizers like compost for the most part. You're adding lots of organic matter that way too. So I think that's basically the conclusion that I've come to. It's just the reality of vegetable production. It doesn't work very easily with no-till.
If you do some research on the Menniken farms in Bismarck, North Dakota, they're successfully doing it. It's, yeah, you need a little bit of specialized equipment, but you know, the way they're doing it is unbelievable. And it takes the one of the best quotes I heard was in agriculture today, the worst ideas or the worst compaction we have in agriculture is between our ears. And Herman, you're doing an awesome job and you're doing lots of good things, but for the average producer, it's I can't. So this is that compaction issue that we have to fix first. So once we fix that, and we find these systems that are working and then modify them to what we are, the way we're managing, or the way we can manage. Mannequin Farms, Jay Fuhr, just one of my mentors, a wealth of information. So that's first place I would go and do a little bit of research.
Yeah, often these farms are a little bit bigger scale than what we're operating on. Like, I have 25 acres to work with, but lots of other farms are 5 to 10 acres, and then you're usually doing it, you don't even have any equipment. You're putting it all in by hand, right? Even our stuff is we're planting everything by hand. So yeah, it is exciting to think that we will be able to develop ways of doing it. So far, I don't think it's just been really difficult.
Jay does both garden scale and the high tunnel. And it's worthwhile doing a research trip out there.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you to you both. The next question is, do you have a suggestion for a cover crop mix for an in the ground 4-season greenhouse? No livestock access and manual labor.
Well, if I'm going to jump in and answer that first, we don't, I think in general, I've tried using a few cover crops in the greenhouses. I don't think it's really a great place to use cover crops. Depending on how you're using your greenhouses, you're usually going in and out of them. Like that's valuable real estate, and you don't want to be tying it up for very long. And unfortunately, we're the way we use our greenhouses anyways, we may have a little space in the summer that something isn't being grown, but it's too short to really be effective for a green manure. There isn't enough time, and it gets really hot, and we have to keep irrigating. I just found that it's better off just to focus on using composts in the greenhouse. That's been my approach anyway.
Yeah, and I'm the opposite. Anytime you can get any growth on any plant, those root exudates drive everything. So when you're dealing with a closed system like that, adding the compost, absolutely. But my go-to is the Italian ryegrass over the annual, just because it's a biennial plant. Number 2, it's going with the oats. The root exudates, the roots, and once again, depending on what the last crop was, what the next crop is going to be, do you put a brassica in? Do you put some sunflower, some flax? I'm all about diversity.
Yeah, it's definitely something it's worth trying. I think really, you want to try some things, and it just depends how much space, how much time do you have between the last time you take a crop out and the first time you need it again, and you've got to give yourself some time to be able to till some things in if they're in the way, or if you're going to use tarps or whatever, then you need space. You need a few weeks of tarps just to kill something to be able to get into the bed again. And it doesn't, it just depends on whether you can find enough time in there to really get much of anything. But you can, if you're going to just have spring crops and then you got the rest of the year where it's not doing anything, well, then you got lots of time.
Yeah, thanks for the both of you for that. And I know this, I think this was kind of already answered a little bit anyway in I think both of your presentations, but there is a question here. Do cover crops need to be turned under to knock them out before planting vegetable crops in the spring? So I don't know if either of you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, certainly some of them you would have to, if fall rye, if you want to grow vegetables after fall rye. I mean, fall rye comes back really vigorously in the spring, which is one of the cool things about it. But yeah, you're gonna have to kill it if you want to get some vegetables growing. So definitely you'll have to do that. But if you take something that winter kills, and I'm sure Kevin will have lots of other ideas, but like I said, one of my go-tos is the annual ryegrass, which I know will winter kill, and the hairy vetch and the peas and the oats do as well. So there, then it's a little bit easier. But if you do have a lot of, if like, in my peas, oats, and hairy vetch green manure mix, for example, it'll leave quite a mat of material on the top of the soil after the winter, and I still, I can't plant right into that. I'd have to till it just to break up that and get it incorporated into the soil. So I do generally have to till it again.
Yeah, did you have any thing to add, Kevin, or have any insights on?
Yeah, basically, this is where, Nicole Masters, she talks about the any sin you do against the soil, you make 2 reparations, and Hermann's doing a bang on job of adding those positives, and any system has any tweaks to make things better. For ourselves here, hairy vetch will overwinter, and when you get into reduced tillage, the issue is the hairy vetch. 30% hard seeds, so they will germinate over the next couple of years. So it in small grain production can cause some issues. And fixer, absolutely great stuff. Going to common vetch is a little more aggressive early in the spring, not quite as winter hardy. And then, yeah, it's the annual ryegrass, as long as you don't allow it to go to flower and get to seed, no problem. What I find here is most producers miss that window when it goes to seed and it shatters out, and you got a weed problem for the next few years. So, this is where, the playing around with the different species and, the forbs. One of the forbs I like including in these mixes is, especially the heavy clays, is something like chicory. Chicory has a wonderful root. You will have to terminate it because it will overwinter. One of the things Dr. Chris Nichols says, and she's another one that if you want to learn about organic minimum till, zero till production, Chris Nichols, and I'll just type her name in. Where'd my chat go? Oh, there it is. Type mess. Dr. Chris Nichols. She's worked at the Rodale Institute. She's worked for the NRC in the USDA. She actually just moved to Calgary, and she is the leading authority on mycorrhizae fungi in the world. So not only is she smart that, but she understands organic zero till. So if you reach out to her, Chris Systems is her website. I would have to figure out how to spell it, but she has some really good information. And one of the things when I was, we've been doing like 4 meetings in the last 6 weeks together, and one of the things that every time I listen to her, I always pick up something new. And so when you have a plant and you're going to use a roller crimper to terminate it, I was always told it has to be in the flowering stage in order for it to die. She said last week that if you have something that is in the vegetative stage growing and you roller crimp it, then you go on right angles and you roller crimp it again 5 days later, and it's not in the reproductive stage, you will kill it. But you need to roller crimp it twice at right angles or thereabouts. So that's a real neat thing. So that the implications of that is that when you have that beautiful rye or oat cover crop growing, and that seed-end ratio, so as that plant matures, that seed-end ratio then widens. What's going to happen is it's going to take longer to break down. So if we're able to terminate it earlier in the season, when it's less mature, it's going to rot down quicker because it's going to have a more appropriate seed-end ratio for that microbes to eat. This way you can have a high residue sitting on the surface and not have to do as much tillage to get rid of it. So the other thing about a lot of these weeds, like when if you go out and buy that book, When Weeds Talk, one of the things you're going to find is most of these weeds that will start showing up, they will show up because of low calcium flux and high soil nitrates. High soil nitrates means that we don't have a plant growing in the vegetative stage to eat it. When we have a plant that's in the vegetative stage, so fall rye seeded with the leeks, it's going to have a relatively shallow root system. It's not going to take a lot of nutrients or water because it's only 10-15 centimeters high. But what it's going to do is it's going to capture any nitrogen that's going toward the nitrate part. We can get deeper into this if you want. But as it gets closer to nitrate, it'll take it up, absorb it, and there's the protein of that fall rye plant is only going to get so high. It's going to then release that nitrogen that it captured, released it back into the soil as a protein amino acid, or maybe ammonium. And those the weeds cannot use. So having this vegetative plant growing in your asparagus, in your kale, in your whatever crop you have, is playing catch and release with those nutrients. And the nutrients that it releases back into the soil is going to be in a stage that the pioneering weeds, pioneering plants that need that high, or the high bacterial soils, they can't use it. So these crops that we're growing are able to use that and flourish, and whereas the weeds can't. Going back to the quackgrass, couchgrass issue, whenever you have a creeping rooted grass, it is searching for available calcium. So when we have soils high in fungi, soils that have high fungic content that are minimal till are able to have a high flux rate of calcium because of the evolutionary synergistic type of partnerships that they have. So these are the things we want to do. We want to minimize nitrates. So when I see a soil test and I see high nitrates, I know that that person does not use any fall cover crops that are in the vegetative stage, and they're going to have lots of weeds. It's so predictable. And so when we get years like this where it's hot and dry and it's tough to get a cover crop established, yeah, that's a bit of a challenge. You may, if you get later rains, you may get that flush of weeds. But because you tried and 99 out of 100 times, the cover crop is going to grow better in the ground than in the bag. So if you try and put it down, and once again, controlling your costs, hairy vetch, wonderful and fixing thing, plant. But there's a cost to it. But what's the alternative? More tillage, more compost. There's way more expense from that than buying the seed.
Awesome. Thanks for elaborating on that. I'm just looking at a question here from Megan that was sort of a follow-up question from Arzina about the no-till, and they're asking which cover crops can be left over winter and with no-till grazing or managed in any way. So, but Megan, I'm not sure, maybe you want to pop on and just let us know where you're located, just because then I know like Kevin's speaking, in a different geography than Hermann is speaking. So maybe that would help us out with who would be best to answer this if you're able to pop on. I don't know if you're still here.
Yeah, it looks like she says she's in the caribou.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, so yeah, if you have any suggestions for someone living in the caribou for some cover crops that could be overwintered. Yeah.
Well, I think fall rye will definitely overwinter pretty much anywhere. There probably are other ones that Kevin can suggest, but that would be my first thought.
Yeah, fall rye, it's the no-brainer in the States. It's the go-to. They call it cereal rye, but winter triticale, winter wheat, the Italian ryegrass will kind of overwinter in the Lethbridge area. Chicory should, plantain should, sweet clover, hairy vetch. If hairy vetch does not get the flower in that year, then it will overwinter. If it does flower, then the sugars have gone to the top, trying to produce seed, then normally it winter kills. So, those are the quick, once again, you want it to overwinter, maybe alfalfa, maybe you get into some orchard grass, maybe it's perennial ryegrass. It really depends on what your goals are and what you're trying to do. So, and how easily do you want to kill it? And one of the things when you start dealing with the high tower or high tunnel systems, one of the things that Jay Fuhr does is he puts down 2x6s or 2x4s on the places where he's going to seed, and he lets the cover crop grow everywhere else, terminates it, and then just goes straight in and seeds directly into those dead strips. And once again, something like fall rye, the more aggressive it is in the fall, and you allow it to get bigger in the spring, the harder it is going to be to kill.
Yeah.
So the quick rule of thumb is in the prairies here is if you want your perennials to be strong, you never graze them in August, September, October when we're in that freezing mode. So that this way we don't allow it to regrow. So if you think about that, and if you have fall rye and you want it to die or winter kill it more readily, go out there and mow it in the fall. Mow it, trim it. If you have critters, get out there and graze it, abuse it, so that in the spring it's going to be weaker. Because if you got those nice big leaves and it's 20 centimeters high, it's going to be really healthy in the spring. And these are the trade-offs of having these cover crops and how we manage them.
Great, thanks. And there's a question here about just if someone has a more like clay-based soil, so they're looking for the best cover crops or techniques to build up topsoil in a clay loam. And then in brackets, they have soil sort of at the base of a mountain. And so if you have any suggestions for cover crops that could help build up topsoil there, yeah, either Hermann or Kevin.
Yeah, you want to start with that one, Kevin? I've got some ideas, but I've already mostly said what they are.
Living roots in the vegetative stage. That is the quickest and easiest way to build soil. There's one of my buddies down in Oklahoma. He averages in a year, he grows 2.5 centimeters of topsoil per year on average. And the key is living roots, living roots, living roots. When we start adding the diversity, once again, I go back to triangles because they're so easy and they're so strong. Grass, legume, broadleaf, get that diversity in there, get living roots. If you can, reduce the tillage, if there's all of these things all add up to building soil. And so on our farm, when I bought it in 99, I had probably 1%, 0.75% of organic matter. And when we tested it last, we were close to 7% organic matter. We did that in 10 years. That's not knowing what I was doing. I started working with a dairy near Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, which is almost at the end of agriculture in Saskatchewan. And we have built up, even though he salages all of his biomass off, we have averaged 1% organic matter build over 7 years. So we went from 7% organic matter, now we're close to 15% organic matter. And that's using zero till, salaging everything off, but lots of diversity, having these biennials in our mixes. That's root exudates, root exudates, root exudates.
Thanks, Kevin. Hermann, did you have anything that you would like to add?
Well, I mean, I just had good success with that peas, oats, and hairy vetch. Doesn't quite fill the triangle that Kevin was talking about, but sometimes you also have to make some decisions based on other factors as well, seed availability, just how well they grow together and how it grows in your soil. You just might have to try some different things. And I've over the years tried a number of different things as well. Like I just tried or Brazilian clover, for example. I really didn't like it. It just didn't do well at all for me, and there was weeds all over it. And I just thought, okay, this is definitely not me. And I tried buckwheat, doesn't work for us. I tried a sweet clover, which is a cool thing. It really does in the second year put on a lot of biomass, and it's pretty cool. But I just found that this one that just works the best for us. And you just have to try a few different things. Don't it isn't going to do any harm, and you'll just see, okay, did it work or didn't it?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Sunflowers would be one thing I would suggest to try. Sunflowers have beautiful taproot, and highly mycorrhizal. Flax is another one. Small seeded, cheap. It has some real good potential in a lot of these mixes.
Yeah, you just have to be, like, from my perspective, always I'm looking for weed control, because I really don't want to see weeds grow in my grimier. And so that's often what I'm looking at, is saying, well, is this doing a good job of shading out the weeds? And if it does, then I'm happier than when it doesn't.
Shading is one. Tying up nitrates. Tying up nitrates is the #1 goal we need to do. When we tie up nitrate, and when we do a soil test, always check for nitrates, always check for ammonium. Not ammonia. Ammonia is deadly. Ammonium is the NH4 that goes to gets converted to amino acids and proteins the quickest. Nitrates needs 2 steps in order to get to amino acids. So we want to keep the nitrogen form away from nitrate. And how we do that is a green plant in the vegetative stage. So not only in these root exudates is it carbohydrates and sugars, it is proteins, it's amino acids, it's a lot of these nitrogen containing compounds that weeds cannot use, but our cash crop can. And when we start looking at what species, and so when you said you used Brazilian clover and didn't smother anything, remember when I said earlier that in evolution of what we're doing of the plants, the legumes, they coincide with everything. Grasses, they need nitrogen. They need help. Brassicas, they're scavengers. They're going to take anything they can and hoard it. And so when we're looking at this, and when we're looking at weeds, and we have a legume in there, or we have, Phacelia is another one, a poor competitor. But saying that, when it's a poor competitor, that's something we should be putting with something else. So to put that in with oats, with Italian ryegrass, with annual ryegrass, with getting that triangle back. And so in your case, a lot of your broadleaf is your asparagus, your kale. You already have that in rotation. You maybe don't need to add that, but can add a fork into it. Yeah. This is the challenge that I always look at these blends and say, that's a good blend. How do we make it better?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm actually just going to skip ahead for a sec because Hermann, you mentioned just, sometimes seed availability is a challenge. And I know one of the questions that came up during your presentation was just someone asking where you source your seeds from. So maybe you could respond. And then also, if you don't mind, maybe also like any resources that come up that you think are great, like either of you, you could also just pop it in the chat, because then if folks miss it, it's, it's right there, or they could, have something to click on or copy and paste. So yeah, where do you source your seeds from, your cover crop seed?
Yeah, different sources from wherever I can get it from. But one of my main sources is Fieldstone Granary in Armstrong. So because they're nice and close by, and they have a good selection of sort of the bigger things like peas, oats, fall rye, available in organic versions, and then other things like hairy vetch and a few other, even the annual ryegrass. Often they just purchase them from some other seed company. They're not available organically generally. And so we're just getting them from somewhere like Dawson Seeds or something that is based, well, they're getting them from the coast. I think they have a number of different different locations, but yeah, so you kind of just wherever your local seed dealer is, and then try to see what's available, and ideally choose organic. When you're an organic farmer, you have to be looking for that for sure. And if it's not available organically, just you just order it from whatever seed dealer has that seed available. That's what I do.
We
Anyway.
started working with Rico Thurston, and I put his phone number in there. You can give him a call. He's fairly well versed in the use of cover crops too. So
does he ship to BC then?
he's I want to say Kamloops, but I think he's Kamloops.
Oh,
He has clients right from the island out to almost Calgary. So he covers a fair swath.
yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you both for those resources. I'm trying to get through. There's so many questions, and I'm feeling super bummed because I'm looking at the time and I'm like, we only have 10 minutes left, and I know we're not going to get through all of them. I'm trying my best here. I see there was a question above from John just asking about some resources for what to plant with different vegetable crops to cut down on weeds. But I know, Hermann, you talked extensively about that in your presentation. So John, I hope that your question was answered there, and I'm going to just continue on. But if it wasn't, feel free to pop back into the chat or pop on and ask again. The next question was from someone asking, did Kevin say that fall rye was allopathic, and what does that mean, and is it a problem for Hermann?
Okay, so with fall rye, a lot of people like using fall rye because it suppresses weeds. And with fall rye, when it's in the vegetative stage, so it's nice and leafy, it is releasing 80% of the carbon back into the soil as root exudate. But with fall rye, it has evolved to reducing plant competition by releasing this chemical in the soil that suppresses other plants from growing. So in the vegetative state. So in Hermann's fields, when he's applying them after the leeks are up and going, perfect, because the leeks are far enough along, they're really not concerned about building up any more huge nutrients supplies in the soil. They're well on their way. So adding the fall rye there, perfect, because then that fall rye is soaking up free nitrate, releasing allelopathic into the proper chemicals into the soil. Everything is working fine. And then in the spring, when it overwinters, when he's tilling it and then leaving it for 2 to 3 weeks, that gives time because he's going in when that seed-N ratio, it's not 80 to 1, it's probably down 40 to 1. And he's giving it 2 weeks, you got lots of rain, it breaks down, the allelopathy then naturally starts breaking down, the next crop, no problem. There's a research trial that they did in North Dakota when they were just getting into the cover crops. And what they did is they were, planting green. Planting green is having that, in this case, fall rye growing, then turning around, direct seeding some corn and soybeans into it. And what they found for the first 5 years, that 80% of the time they had a yield reduction, 20% of the time they had the same yield. They said, geez, that isn't working. What isn't working? Then the 1 year, someone accidentally or on purpose terminated their fall rye, waited 2 weeks, and then they seeded the corn. They saw a yield increase. So then when they started terminating their rye, waiting 2 weeks, then seeding the corn and soybean into it, now it flipped. 80% of the time they had higher yield, 20% of the time they had the same yield. So with that fall rye, it's all in the timing and how much time do you have between when it's in the vegetative stage and when you're planting, and then how you're planting. So if you're seeding deep, big seeded stuff, seeded deep, it's less affected, whereas you're just scratching in something into fall rye that's either growing or is just terminated, and most likely you're going to have an issue with germination and establishment, because you have to remember fall rye doesn't care whether a plant that you want or a weed it doesn't want, that allelopathic chemical is going to break down and cause damage to that germination. So it's managing that fall rye is key. So if you're concerned about that, then maybe take a look at going to a winter triticale or a winter wheat, because it doesn't have the allelopathy.
Thanks. And Herman, it doesn't sound like it's a problem for you. I think that's kind of the.
No, because yeah, I mean, if anything, it's part of the reason why you'd want to grow it, I think, is because, like I said, one of the reasons I want to grow these green manures is to control weeds. And if the fall rye is established, yeah, there's not going to be much in the way of germination of the small seeded weeds that might start coming up, because the fall rye is kind of releasing those chemicals to keep it from keeping small seeded crops from rise or weeds from germinating.
Mm-hmm. And then just while we're on the continued fall rye topic, there's quite a few questions that have come in just around what time, when's the latest you can plant fall rye. There's a question: after you till fall rye a crop in the spring, how long do you wait until you seed it? After you till the fall rye, after you till the fall rye crop in the spring, how long do you wait until you seed it?
Seed a vegetable crop or something, maybe.
Yeah. And then, sorry, I'm reading there's a bunch of questions kind of around the same thing. So I'm just trying to maybe we could lump them all. Maybe you could answer that one.
Sure, I can quickly answer the fall rye in terms of the seeding date. I find the earlier you can get it going, the more vigorously it'll establish in the fall. So I like to get some of the main areas done by the middle of September. But having said that, you can also seed it kind of into the middle of October, but that's pushing it. You're not going to get a lot more, much. That's from my area. You have to just try it in your own area. It'll be different, wherever you are. But at the coast, you could probably do it a lot later still. But we will eventually get snow, so and it gets really cold, and just stuff doesn't really. It needs to be well established, I think, if you want to get a good crop in the fall where it's worth tilling in and you're really adding something to the soil. If you seed it, the later you seed it, the less you'll get. Just like Kevin was mentioning, if it's being hammered or it just isn't being established very well, or you're overgrazing it or something, then you're just not going to get much in the fall or in the spring. I mean, and I like to get lots in the spring so I can till in lots of green material, and that's all those nutrients going into the soil prior to my crops.
By the way, we're potentially getting 10 centimeters of snow here tomorrow, so.
Okay. But it'll melt again, right?
Oh yeah, well, we hope anyways.
Awesome, thanks. And someone was just asking if either of you have any suggestions for deterring pigweed.
Pigweed is a nitrate accumulator. So as soon as you see lamb's quarters, pigweed, that shows that your nitrates are high in the soil. So how do you get rid of it? A biennial crop. Have some of these tuber crops, these brassicas, tie up that free nitrate. Once again, that when weeds talk, it gives the reason why these things are growing. And pigweed is nitrates. So if you're ever going to be feeding something, so if you have animals and you're going to be grazing pigweed, especially late in the season where you're getting some frost on it, nitrates are going to be a huge issue with that. So, that's one of the warnings. Once again, if we listen to nature, Dr. Muir, he's a researcher on humates, and he has a line that I absolutely love. He talks about nature's intelligence. And when we listen to nature, we can learn a lot of things. And so these weeds, they're growing for a reason. Why are they growing? You don't see pigweed out in the forest. You don't
No.
see all of these issues. You don't see them in a natural state.
Yeah.
They're only in disturbed areas where we are using our wisdom and farming, and we got these problems that we can't control. Why? Because we're not doing it in a natural fashion. We broke nature's cycle.
Yeah. Although I would add, from my perspective, I'm not too concerned about pigweed. Like Kevin was saying, it kind of indicates that there are nutrients in your soil. Like you can have worse weeds. And so like for vegetables, you're wanting to have a soil that is, has a fair number of available nutrients. So I find that, if there are a problem in your crop, that's probably because you let them go to seed the year before. And if you're doing a good green manures in between, I think it'll help with that. But you're always going to have pigweed coming up in your crop, and you just got to do some cultivating or weeding or hand hoeing. And then if you can, like, that's why I do that quite often, where I try to put in an underseeded fall rye or annual rye to kind of just take away the opportunity for other things like pigweed to get established and get going.
Yeah, use the nitrate. Use the nitrate, do soil tests, and if your nitrates are low, in my mind, things are going, assuming that it's in the ammonium or the organic nitrogen state. If you don't have the organic nitrogen state, so low organic matter, you don't have mineralization, you're not going to have nitrate because it isn't there. You're going to have tough soils to grow anything.
Awesome, thanks. And I'm just gonna, I know I can see we're at 8:01. I'm gonna throw one more question at you, just because quite a few people have asked this specific question, and it's just asking about wireworm pressure and if you experience that, and maybe I don't know if you have any advice on how you might eliminate wireworm. I don't know if people are specifically wondering through cover cropping or, but yeah, just maybe speak to that a little bit, and then, yeah.
Well, fortunately, wireworm is something I don't have a problem with. So unfortunately, I can't really say much about it. It's just not something I've had to deal with. So yeah. I unfortunately can't give much of an answer to that.
No worries. Maybe Kevin, do you have any insights?
The whole thing with, and once again, going back to Albert Howard, whenever you see these whether it's insects or disease, that nature's garbage men are insects and disease. So that when we see things like wireworm, when we see root diseases, leaf diseases, that means that our system is broken. We need to evaluate what the problem is. When we have grass breaking, when we have high manure applications, that drives a lot of the wireworms. So then how do we get away from it? And I've talked to Jay Fuhr to see, what is there a magic cure? I've talked to Nicole Masters, Jill Clapperton, and they said, it's going to take time to rebalance those soils. And so, and this is where, the nice thing about this group, most of them have small acres, so that what we always need to do is have a refuge around our fields, around our plots, so that natural predators are living in there. And when you have the natural predators, this is going to control some of these outbreaks that we have in our fields. So I didn't answer the question, but I did sure a decent job of dancing.
That's great, thanks. Yeah, so unfortunately we are over time now, but and I know there was like so many more amazing questions that were coming through, and I apologize that we couldn't make it through all of them. I think it just is clear that we need to host more events in this topic, and hopefully next year there'll be in person on farms, with people coming together and talking about this face to face. I think that's going to be really something to look forward to for sure. And I know something I'll be planning for as we look into sort of what we're going to be doing for next year with farm folk and farmer events. So it's great to see so much interest in the topic, and we'll definitely keep that in mind. I just want to thank everyone who joined us this evening. It was really awesome turnout and a lively discussion. And I can always appreciate, especially in online spaces these days. So thank you for that. And Herman and Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. You've been incredibly informative and such a joy to hear from. I loved all of your photos. I know there was a lot of comments in the chat about how great all the photos were. So thank you. I think there's so many takeaways from the knowledge shared this evening. So thanks again. I'm going to be sending out a follow-up email with a survey, a link to the recording that's going to be on our website. So you can go back and watch this, and a link to some upcoming events. We have a BC seed gathering coming up on November 19th. Just plug that in there. So I'll send you the link to that. And then please, if you could take 5 minutes to fill out our survey, it's incredibly helpful for informing future events, especially topics for events. As we are in the planning stages for more farmer events next year, it's really helpful to hear directly from farmers what is most useful to hear about. And so yeah, I would really appreciate if you take a little bit of time just to fill that out for us. And I think that's it. So thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and have a good Halloween weekend. And hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Thank you for the invite and for speaking. It was fun.
Thank you.
Emily, that was really good.